Picture this: your neighbor spends years treating part of your property like it's his. He screams at your workers, calls you names, tries to punch a landscaper. Then, convinced he's finally going to get you in trouble, he calls code enforcement. 24 hours later, he's standing outside in 90-degree heat, ripping out his own fence with a crowbar while begging his kids to come help. This is the story of how one angry phone call became one of the most satisfying cases of instant karma I've ever experienced. If you've ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor or watched someone create their own downfall because they just couldn't mind their own business, you're going to love this one. Hit that like button, subscribe for more real Reddit revenge stories, and let's get into today's unbelievable tale. Buying a house is supposed to feel like the beginning of a new chapter. A fresh start, a place where you build memories, plant flowers, mow the lawn on Saturday mornings, maybe wave to the neighbors over a cup of coffee. That's exactly what my wife and I imagined when we bought our house 4 years ago. It wasn't brand new. The neighborhood was older, full of mature trees and homes that had been standing for decades. Every driveway told a story, every porch looked like it had seen generations come and go. The inspection went smoothly, the city signed off, the appraisal came back clean, nothing unusual. Not a single person mentioned the fence. At first glance, it looked normal enough. Our neighbor had built a long wooden privacy fence that started near the front corner of his house, stretched across his driveway with a large swinging gate, and continued almost all the way to the front corner of ours. It looked like one continuous property line, except it wasn't. Hidden behind that fence was a narrow strip of land about 4 feet wide and 30 feet long that legally belonged to us. We couldn't even access it. The fence completely blocked it off. Honestly, during those first several months, we didn't think much about it. The strip was just grass. Our neighbor mowed it every week. No arguments, no complaints, no drama. We figured maybe the previous owners had some informal agreement years ago. As long as everyone got along, who cared? Then nature decided to expose the problem. That fall, after what felt like the third once-in-a-century rainstorm in the same year, I noticed something that instantly made my stomach tighten. There was moisture creeping into our basement. Not enough to flood anything, just a thin line of water slowly sneaking through the foundation wall. Tiny, but enough to know something wasn't right. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. Walking around the house, I inspected every inch until I reached the fenced-off side. Looking over as best I could, I noticed the ground wasn't level anymore. Years of settling had created a slight slope. Instead of directing rainwater away from our house, it now funneled it straight toward our foundation. I sighed. This wasn't anyone's fault. Ground shifts over time. The fix seemed simple enough. Come spring, I'd hire landscapers to regrade the soil and install a French drain. It would protect my basement. And it would also prevent runoff from spilling onto the neighbor's driveway. A win for everyone, or so I thought. Winter came and went. By early spring, I had a landscaping crew scheduled. 3 hardworking guys showed up early with wheelbarrows, shovels, compactors, and a trailer full of mulch. I walked them through the project. Just reshape the grade away from the house, I explained, then leave a flower bed where the fresh soil is. Simple, professional, no problems expected. For the first 20 minutes, everything went exactly according to plan. Then the front door next door exploded open. An older man stormed outside. He had to be somewhere around 60, maybe a little older. Although, as my wife liked to joke, life had been so angry at him that he looked closer to 80. His face was permanently red. His shoulders stayed tense. Every step looked like he was marching into battle. He didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, he walked straight toward the landscapers. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The crew looked confused. One guy pointed toward me. "The homeowner hired us. I don't care who hired you." The old man jabbed a finger toward the ground. "You're standing on my property?" I blinked. My property? That was news to me, especially considering multiple contractors had already worked over there. A siding company, the cable installer, a plumber. Not once had he complained. Not once had he said a word. Now suddenly this tiny strip of land had become sacred territory. The landscapers stayed surprisingly calm. One even laughed awkwardly. "Sir, we're just doing drainage work." That only made him angrier. His voice got louder. His hands started flying everywhere. He accused them of ruining his yard, destroying his grass, trespassing. By now, several neighbors had stepped outside just to see what all the yelling was about. Eventually, he stomped back into his house, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. One of the workers looked at me and shrugged. "Think he's been drinking?" Another laughed. "Either that or he woke up looking for a fight." We finished the project anyway. The crew carefully graded the soil, installed everything exactly as planned, covered the fresh dirt with mulch. Before leaving, they even shaped a beautiful flower bed that curved naturally alongside the house. Honestly, it looked fantastic. That little forgotten strip of land had become one of the nicest landscaped areas on the property. I remember standing there thinking, maybe this whole thing was over. Maybe he had simply been having a bad day. I couldn't have been more wrong for almost a year. Nothing happened, no yelling, no complaints, no dramatic confrontations. In fact, I started convincing myself that maybe the old guy had simply overreacted that one afternoon. Maybe he'd been embarrassed after making a scene in front of half the neighborhood. So when spring rolled around again, I decided to make that flower bed actually look nice. My wife had always loved roses. Not the perfectly manicured kind you see in magazines, but big, colorful bushes that exploded with blooms every summer. I planted several along the freshly graded bed. When they finally flowered, they transformed that forgotten strip of land. Every time we looked out the window, it made us smile. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it became round two. Later that season, we hired a landscaping company for a complete yard cleanup. Nothing extravagant: trim the shrubs, pull weeds, spread fresh mulch, edge the beds. The crew worked their way around the property without any issues until they reached that narrow strip beside the house. Then, right on schedule, the neighbor came charging out again. This time he wasn't just yelling, he was furious. "Get off my property," the workers froze. One guy looked at me across the yard with that expression every contractor gets when they realize they're walking into somebody else's neighborhood drama. I hurried over before things escalated. The old man wasn't interested in talking. His face was bright red, veins bulged from his neck. He pointed at the mulch like someone had dumped toxic waste onto his lawn. "You're destroying my yard," one of the landscapers calmly answered. "Sir, we're only replacing mulch." Wrong answer. The old man lunged forward, not a full punch. More like a wild swipe that barely missed one of the workers' shoulders. Everyone took a step backward. For a second, everything went silent. Then came the part that honestly left all of us speechless. "You dirty Mexicans!" The insult echoed across the front yards. The crew stared at each other. Every single landscaper standing there was white. One even had bright red hair. There wasn't a single Hispanic worker in sight. The comment made absolutely no sense. It was as if anger had completely disconnected his brain from reality. The crew exchanged awkward looks. One guy quietly muttered, "What?" Even they couldn't figure out where that came from. I stepped between them. "Enough." He ignored me. Instead, he turned all of that rage directly toward me. "You owe me a new lawn." "No." "You ruined my grass." "No, I didn't. I want it completely resodded." Still, "No." That single word seemed to short-circuit him. His entire vocabulary suddenly narrowed down to one favorite insult. "Bitch." Again bitch, then louder bitch, over and over and over. He wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. He just wanted everyone nearby to hear him. Windows started opening. Neighbors peeked through curtains. People walking dogs slowed down just enough to watch the spectacle unfold. It was embarrassing. Not for me, for him. Eventually, I turned to the landscaping crew. "Guys, forget this side. We're done here." They loaded their tools without another word. As they drove away, one rolled down his window. "I don't think we're taking jobs on this street anymore." I couldn't even blame him. That evening, my wife and I sat on the back porch talking about what had happened. Neither of us wanted another confrontation. Neither of us wanted workers getting screamed at just because they were doing their jobs. She finally asked the obvious question. "So, what do we do now?" I looked toward that narrow strip hidden behind his fence. "Honestly, nothing. If he wants to make it impossible for us to maintain our own property, then we'll stop trying." It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was surrender. We simply stopped caring. No more mulch. No more flowers, no more landscapers, no more arguments. The weeds slowly began reclaiming the flower bed. Week after week they grew taller, first ankle height, then knee height by late summer. Some of them stood nearly 4 feet tall. A jungle, ironically. You couldn't even see it from the street because his fence blocked almost the entire view. The only person forced to stare at those weeds every single day was him. We didn't lose a minute of sleep over it. Apparently, he did. The following spring turned out to be one of the wettest on record. Rain seemed to fall every other day. By early May, the weeds had already shot up past my knees. One Saturday morning, I was mowing the front lawn, headphones on, enjoying one of the few sunny days we'd had in weeks. That's when I noticed movement. The old man wasn't coming through his gate. He wasn't walking down the sidewalk. He actually climbed over the fence, onto my property. He marched straight toward me until he was only inches away. I shut off the mower. He didn't even say hello. "When are you gonna clean this crap up?" I took a slow breath. I wasn't angry anymore. Mostly, I was tired. "I'll clean it," I said calmly. "As soon as I know you won't harass me or the people I hire." His eyes widened, like I'd personally insulted him. "What? You heard me. I've hired workers twice. You screamed at both crews. You even tried swinging at one of them. I'm not putting anyone through that again, for just a second. He didn't know what to say, then, just like before, he reached for the only weapon he seemed to have. Bitch, I kept quiet, bitch. Still nothing, you lazy bitch, I shrugged. If it bothers you that much, I looked him directly in the eyes, call the city. The words hit him like a challenge, his lips curled into a grin for the first time in months. He actually looked happy, like he'd finally found the perfect way to punish me. Without another word, he climbed back over the fence. Then, instead of going inside, he started complaining to every neighbor within earshot, pointing toward my house, throwing his arms around dramatically, telling anyone who would listen what a terrible neighbor I was. I just restarted the mower, finished cutting the grass, and went inside. What I didn't know was that he'd already made the phone call, and that one decision was about to become the biggest mistake of his entire life. The next afternoon, there was a knock at my front door, not the impatient pounding of an angry neighbor, not a delivery driver. Three calm, deliberate knocks. When I opened the door, a man wearing a city-issued polo shirt smiled politely and held up an identification badge. Good afternoon. I'm with code enforcement. I almost laughed, so he actually did it. I stepped aside and invited him onto the porch. I have a pretty good idea why you're here. He smiled in that way people do when they've seen this exact situation 100 times before. Your neighbor reported excessive weeds and property maintenance violations. Then he looked around, freshly cut lawn, trimmed hedges, flower beds neatly edged, a clean driveway. He paused for a second. I'm honestly not sure why I'm here. That caught me off guard. He wasn't rude, he wasn't accusatory. If anything, he looked mildly annoyed that someone had wasted his afternoon. I don't see any violations from the street, he said. Can you show me where these weeds are supposed to be? Absolutely. I walked him around the side of the house. The moment we reached the narrow strip beside the fence, he stopped walking. His eyes traveled from the overgrown weeds to the wooden fence, then back toward my house. He frowned. Wait, he took a few more steps. Does this fence block access to your property? Yes. He looked again, almost measuring it with his eyes. This land belongs to you? It does. He pulled out a small tablet and started checking the property records. For nearly a minute, he didn't say anything. The only sounds were birds chirping and the distant buzz of someone mowing their lawn. Then he let out a quiet sigh. Well, he turned the tablet around just enough to confirm what I already knew. The property line is exactly where you said it is. He looked back at the fence one more time, then he smiled, not a smug smile, more like someone who had just solved a very easy puzzle. Welp, there's nothing I can cite you for, I nodded. I figured, but he pointed directly at the fence. He has 10 days to remove that. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? It's illegally blocking access to your property. He kept scrolling through his inspection notes. While I'm here, his eyes drifted toward my neighbor's backyard. I also noticed the weeds growing between his patio pavers. Tap, tap, another note, and his sidewalks need edging. Tap, the aluminum awnings could use cleaning as well. Tap. He looked back at me. I'll be speaking with him next. Then, just like that, he walked toward my neighbor's front door. I didn't need to hear the conversation. The raised voices told me everything. The following morning, I was drinking coffee when someone knocked again. This time it wasn't code enforcement. It was my neighbor's wife. She looked exhausted. Not angry, just tired, like she'd spent years cleaning up messes someone else kept making. She offered a weak smile. Can we talk? Sure. She glanced toward the fence before speaking. The city says it has to come down. I heard, she hesitated. Would you be willing to split the cost for just a moment? I actually considered it, not because I owed them anything, but because I genuinely felt bad for her. She hadn't screamed at contractors. She hadn't called me names. She hadn't started any of this, but then, like a movie replaying in my mind, I remembered every insult, every landscaper who'd been harassed, every unnecessary argument, every time I'd tried to be reasonable, every single bitch he'd shouted across the yard. I smiled politely. I'm sorry, but us bitches are out of charity money this week. For a second she just stood there, then, to my surprise, she laughed, not loudly. Just one defeated little laugh. She shook her head. I figured. She walked away without another word. Over the next several days, the neighborhood got free entertainment. Every morning the old man dragged tools into the driveway. Crowbar, hammer, reciprocating saw, pry bar. He attacked that fence like it had personally betrayed him. Boards cracked, posts groaned. Nails squealed as they were ripped free. The same fence he defended like it was the Great Wall of China was now coming apart one splinter at a time. In the summer heat, sweat poured down his face. Every few minutes I'd hear another frustrated yell, sometimes at the fence, sometimes at the tools, sometimes at absolutely nothing. Then came the phone calls. He started calling his adult children. Apparently removing several years' worth of fencing wasn't quite as easy as screaming at landscapers. Within a day or two, pickup trucks started arriving. His sons climbed out carrying more tools. No one looked happy, no one smiled. They simply got to work dismantling the very structure their father had insisted was untouchable. Neighbors slowed their cars while driving past. Dog walkers suddenly found reasons to take longer routes. People watered already watered flowers just to watch. Nobody had to say a word. Everyone knew exactly why that fence was disappearing. Because one man couldn't keep his mouth shut. As for me, for the first time since buying the house, I could actually walk onto every inch of my own property. It felt strangely satisfying. Not because I had won, because something had finally been made right. I dug up the rose bushes one weekend. They deserved better than being hidden beside a hostile neighbor's house. I replanted them where my wife could actually enjoy them from the patio. Then I pulled up the old mulch, rolled out landscaping fabric, covered the entire strip with pea gravel. Simple, clean. Almost maintenance-free. No weeds, no flowers, nothing anyone could complain about. If my neighbor wanted a permanent view of the side of my house, fine, that's exactly what he'd get, ironically. If he'd simply left us alone from the beginning, he would have kept his fence, he would have kept his privacy, he would have kept his free lawn maintenance. Instead, his own phone call cost him all of it. Sometimes revenge isn't about plotting. Sometimes you don't have to raise your voice, break the rules, or even fight back. Sometimes all you have to do is let an angry person keep talking long enough for them to create their own downfall. Karma doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it shows up wearing a city badge and carrying a clipboard. If you enjoyed this Reddit revenge story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more unbelievable stories where karma has the final word. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had a nightmare neighbor or watched someone completely destroy themselves because of their own ego? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.